into the Bet the Board podcast, NFL Week 17, Monday Night Football edition. I am your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. But before we get things rolling this fine Monday, I want to encourage all of you, our loyal listeners, go to FanDuel.com, use the promo code BetTheBoard, take advantage of all of FanDuel's great new user sign-up bonuses, whether it's a $1,000 risk-free bet, enhanced odds. It's the perfect time to give yourself a new out in the new year as the NFL playoffs rapidly approach. And Payne, before we get into the National Football League, we had a season finale of one of our favorite shows last night. Did you carve out a few minutes to watch, or were you glued to that Vikings-Green Bay Packers travesty on Sunday Night Football?
I appreciate you asking me about that, because I told you what. I wasn't going to watch Snap. Didn't watch Snap. Game was over before it started, and I stuck by that. And so I watched the season finale of Yellowstone. You didn't like it, apparently. Not enough drama.
We can't give away
enough action.
We can't give away
guy. Didn't
we can't
like
give away spoilers
the way
here,
it ended.
But I think they set us up. You know, the previous season, the way it wrapped up, there was a lot going on. To your point, these are storylines that we're building. So I thought it was a little anticlimactic. It wasn't that I didn't like it. I thought it was different than what I anticipated, and we can kind of leave it at that without tipping our hand in terms of what will actually unfold. Because I have to imagine our high percentage of our listeners are devout fans of that fine program.
I would agree. And so that's it. You didn't like it. Now, the best part about it not being enough action for you is you suggested a movie this week, and I was all excited to go to see it. It took me all to not fall asleep in the first 2 hours. And it just was...
Man, tough critic.
Great ending.
Tough
Great
critic,
ending to the
didn't
movie.
appreciate the cinematography and the outstanding acting, even if the storyline left a little bit to be desired.
I appreciate good acting, and that was the first thing I said. It was Bradley Cooper.
Are you going to share with our
fantastic.
listeners the name of the movie, just in case they're confused right now?
I have no idea what the name of it was. It was
there you go.
Nightmare Alley?
Yes, that's what it was.
Alley. There we go. Beautiful. Beautiful. Did you forget
No, I did not.
Is that what happened? It was that good of a movie?
No, I did not forget.
The name of it. Or
I was putting you on the spot. I mean, if you're going to
Gotcha.
trash something, you may as well at least remember the name of it before you trash it properly.
I agree.
All right, you
I agree.
want to talk some football?
That's true.
All right.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
Let's do that. By the way, how'd you feel about our boy Stetson Bennett?
Stetson was good. He stood in the pocket. He made big throws. He showed mobility to try and extend plays. And for maybe the first time in a big game during Kirby Smart's entire time in Athens, they came out being the aggressor. And I think Todd Monken deserves a ton of credit. He showed faith. He showed confidence. But my bigger question for you, Payne, despite Stetson playing the best game of his Georgia career, how the hell do you completely abandon Brock Bowers after the opening drive of that football game?
If you had over 58.5 receiving yards, you had 51 on the opening drive and managed to lose that. Tough sledding there. Tough sledding. I will say this, and not to get too far ahead of things, you like Stetson Bennett so much. What'd you do after the game?
What did I do after the game?
What'd you do after the game?
I made dinner, I had some champagne, and I passed out by about 12:30.
Okay.
Oh.
Okay, we're not going to divulge what you did
that part
after
of what
the
I
game.
did after the game. No, we'll save that for Friday. Why am I going to tip our hand and give it away early now?
Okay. Because I don't know if I'm going to, but by the game might be -7 by the time we record.
Well, plenty of threes out there. Okay. So, yes, I did. I was impressed enough with Stetson Bennett. We had talked at great lengths. We thought it was a buy low opportunity, so I laid a little bit of money line on the open locally here in town, anticipating that the number could climb. So we'll figure out if that's a position I actually like as a week from today when the national championship takes place, but at least got some options in the grand scheme of things.
I am just busting balls. This clearly won't be 7.
If it is, we got one hell of a storyline brewing. It means Bryce Young may not clear COVID protocols, but my gut tells me neither one of these teams is getting tested for anything from chlamydia to COVID to the Ebola virus before they lock horns Monday night at Lucas Oil Stadium.
This is the week. This is the Monday podcast of Week 18 in the NFL. This is what's transpired here. Did you notice Brian Robinson? Now, obviously, he ran for some yards there against Cincinnati, but looked like he had his own personal oxygen mask there. He was definitely fighting something.
They're respiratory illnesses that have plagued us all throughout the course of the fall. And you want to talk about Brian Robinson? Should we talk about the starting quarterback wearing black and white for the Cincinnati Bearcats?
He struggled mightily on third down. Not a good game for Desmond Ridder. Kind of what we expected. So that was, thank God that was such an easy winner, because our bet on Sunday Night Football was dead 24 hours after we gave it out. And hopefully, if you didn't listen to it early, you saw the big note at the top of the description on every platform that this would no longer be a bet. But Kirk Cousins was announced out about 24 hours after we recorded, and then the dominoes started to fall a little bit. Pierce was announced out, and Nick Vigil was announced out, and Cam Dantzler was announced out. I wanted to believe
in the legend of Sean Mannion, the great Oregon State product. Sean Mannion has no future as an NFL starting quarterback with the hitch in his giddy up and everything else. But either way,
he'd only had one day of practice. So I will say it was a great season. We didn't get bit by the COVID bug pretty much at any point throughout the season. We're very fortunate there, but it did clip us.
It's impossible
17.
to outrun the fates for the entire season. Of course, you're happier when those kind of situations unfold, when you're giving back from profits rather than trying to claw your way uphill. So, alas, that's the case. I want to thank our loyal listeners, paying as if you and I didn't follow the news, pointing it out to us that Kirk Cousins would be out. So we appreciate that. And it's probably the one time in the 5+ years we've done this podcast where it actually benefited folks who want to bet the games on Sunday more so than betting them as soon as we give them out. But enough about some of the negativity with the Minnesota Vikings. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in. What are some of the things that stood out to you in a positive manner for what you saw unfold on the football field during Week 17?
Let's just start there, the scene of the crime. What do you got?
Do you want me to go to Cincinnati and Kansas City, where we saw a Kansas City Chiefs secondary unable to do much of anything, whether it was rerouting receivers or even trying to go for jump balls, because there was going to be a high probability that there was a little bit of laundry on the field that entire second half?
Interesting game. So obviously, Jamar Chase was fantastic, and I went and looked this morning. Second least amount of cushion of any receiver in Week 17. So Spags was full-blown like, F it. We're not changing who we are. We're going to play man press, and we're going to be that team again today. It doesn't matter. And Jamar Chase just went nuclear. It was like a one-man band out there. What do you have? 55% of the Bengals' air yards. We know the counting stats, right? 11 catches, 12 targets, 266, and 3 touchdowns. Joe Burrow finished the best quarterback of the week in terms of EPA plus completion percentage above expectation because of Chase. I mean, 266 yards of offense. Every other Bengals player combined, rushing and receiving, 209. And just a monster game. We said that was probably going to be the biggest game in the franchise since 2015. They're in the playoffs. Won the division. Fun team to watch. Historic day for Jamar Chase. But I think what you kind of hinted at there was every meaningful whistle went their way. And I have not seen Andy Reid that upset on the field before, ever. I mean, he was fuming. He was the color of the red jacket. There was a reporter, and I don't know if you saw this, asked him after the game about the 10 penalties, and he was flat out saying, I don't want to get fined.
I didn't see some of that.
When you go back, when you go back and watch where the penalties were and the timing of them, it was like 4 of the penalties extended drives. 20 points came from those drive extending penalties, including the game-winning field goal. Right before the half, Pringle returns the kickoff for a touchdown. It's game over. Right? Chiefs would be up 18 at the break. Refs call a hold. Now, I think it's probably a hold, but most of the times that goes uncalled when it happens 6 yards behind the play and has no impact on it. Like Pringle was already out of the chute. And then there was this little swing late third quarter on back-to-back drives when the game was 28-24 Chiefs, I believe is what it was. KC had 3rd and 2 from the Bengals 40-ish. They were like just right outside the green zone. And it's a 4-down situation there. And then there's a holding penalty on third down. Drive basically ended. It was 3rd and 12. The Chiefs' very next drive, they're on defense, they get a stop, right? Or so they thought. Snead got whistled for about the cleanest coverage you'll ever see in this league.
If you can't defend wide receivers the way L'Jarius Sneed did, you may as well not even go out there and just play 7-on-7.
So instead of like having a 4-point lead and the Bengals punting it back to you from their own 21, it's like a new lease on life. It led to a touchdown. Then there were calls that weren't made. And if you actually go back to this, I'm not sure you saw it, but look at how the Bengals held on to the ball for the final 6 minutes. Obviously, the 3rd and 27 miracle to Jamar Chase, like awesome. Just a fantastic play in a really crucial spot. Spag sent blitz because he knows the Bengals field goal kicker can launch one a mile, so that he's not going to sit there and play prevent and let you gain 12 yards and kick a field goal. He came with some pressure, and it just led to one-on-one coverage. But the most crucial play of that game, it's 31-31 with 2:10 left. The Bengals have 3rd and inches at the KC 1-yard line. Go back and watch. The Bengals left guard gets away with a blatant false start. Jumps. Clear and obvious. Flinches, rocks, you name it. Should be 3rd and 6. At that point, the Chiefs are 100% getting the ball back. Now, on 3rd and 6 from the 6.5, right? Is it an incomplete pass? Is it a touchdown? Do they hold for a field goal? Who knows? But at least the Chiefs get the ball back with a chance to tie the game with a field goal or touchdown, or win the game with a touchdown potentially, right? Refs didn't call the false start. So Cincy ends up picking up an inch without scoring and without gaining basically more than a yard, and they just drained the clock. Then you had the Snead, what was it, on 4th and 1? They called him for another penalty in the end zone. The game's basically over. Yeah. I mean, it was the following play after the matching penalties. It was 4th and 1 when they decided to go for it again, and they called Snead for like the hands to the face. Is it hands to the face? Barely. Are you like calling it in the most critical spot in the game? Probably not. You're just letting guys play. It's just one of those. Every single call that was in like a crucial situation went the Bengals' way. It was pretty wild. Now, and you think about that, we're all like talking about the Bengals winning the division and how impactful that was. Think about this for a minute for Kansas City. That ends up being like one of the worst outcomes of the year for them, because now you don't control your own destiny. It's unlikely you're now the number 1 seed, because the Titans are playing the Texans next week, and they're a double-digit favorite with revenge. And so that hurts, because your right tackle, Lucas Niang, is now out for the season with a torn patella tendon. Left tackle, Orlando Brown, strained his calf. Typically, those are anywhere, if it's super minor, it could be 3 days. If it requires surgery, like, you're out forever, right? You're out a long time. It's been reported that it's minor. So let's see if Orlando Brown plays this week. But now that the bye week looks unlikely, if Orlando Brown's out a couple weeks, you're potentially without both your starting tackles for the opening round of the playoffs.
And a playoff game that most likely, the way things are trending now, would have them pitted up against a divisional rival, whether it's the Chargers or the Raiders, with a high increased level of familiarity between those teams. You mentioned the end of game sequence, and I wanted to pick your brain a little bit. Zach Taylor going for it on 4th and 1. I guess I get it the first time around. Did it surprise you, even after the first failed attempt, that they went for it again, knowing that there were going to be around 50 seconds left in the game?
The first time around, I absolutely loved it. The second time around, you can make a case that you could have effectively, right, there's 50 seconds, right? So you kick your field goal, probably wipes, if you have a good hometown clock keeper, probably wipes 5 seconds off the clock. And then you can execute the mortar kick, which then forces a return and probably drains another 7 seconds off the clock. And at that point, you're giving it back to Mahomes, hopefully at the Chiefs 25 with 38 seconds to go. That was the other way you could play that situation out. I love the aggressiveness, right? You're going for the division win. You're an offensive-based team. You have a chance to dethrone Patrick Mahomes. You can keep him on the sidelines. Like let's try to end this game. And it ended up being perfect for them. They get the penalty call. So automatic first down. Patrick Mahomes never gets the ball back, and that's ultimately how it ended. I didn't mind the aggressiveness. I don't think you can ever be... There's very few times when you look at the charts that you can be too aggressive in this league. very few times. And that was one of the ones where I liked the aggressiveness.
I have to give Tony Romo and Jim Nantz credit on the call. They thought for a second, and you know what? The way they presented it, that Brandon Allen might have actually kneeled down with no timeouts. That would have been something.
He almost tried.
That's what I was going to say. You watch his body language and everything else, and you can kind of hear it in their voices going, wait, he's not going to kneel here, is he? And he takes a step under center and then obviously spikes it, giving them a chance to kick a 19-yard field goal to win it. But definitely a bizarre sequence, a bizarre game overall, and maybe just a better chance for us to fade the Bengals when they play a meaningful playoff game, knowing that defense still has more questions to answer. But to their credit, and to your point, the biggest win in franchise history, at least for the last 5 to 7 years. And clearly they have a gamer that's going to win them a lot of games in Joe Burrow. Going forward, we'll keep tabs on the knee, but Joe Burrow dancing in the locker room tells me it wasn't nearly as bad as it looked in real time at the end of that football game. You talk about aggressiveness, though, and there was probably another illustration of such, one that didn't quite work out the way they drew it up, but the New York Jets, a chance to win the game on 4th and short and plus territory against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They end up getting stopped on 4th down. Tampa marches down the field, wins the football game 28-24, but it felt like there was more than a miscommunication between Zach Wilson and Robert Saleh, that you're trying to quarterback sneak from 2 yards against the tenacious interior of that Tampa Bay Bucs defensive front.
I think you give the Jets a ton of credit. Obviously, they exceeded odds maker expectation, but it's week 17, right? Your season's over. So it's good in the grand scheme of things that the team doesn't quit on its brand new coach. There was also some signs that Zach Wilson can be competent, right? He looked competent at times despite a lot of his receivers not playing for large stretches, especially in this game, right? If you look, he finished in the middle of the pack this week in EPA plus completion percentage above expectation against an above average defense. I love the fact that a defensive-minded coach is trying to end the game on 4th and about 1.5 with 2 minutes to go. Now, what I don't like about that is if you watched the post-game presser, Robert Saleh, who's been as bad of a head coach as anyone in the league this season, throwing his OC Mike LaFleur under the bus and then running him over and then backing up the bus and running him over again. Apparently, that 4th down call was supposed to be an end around to Braxton Berrios. That's what that was supposed to be if you listen to the post-game presser. So it's supposed to be a spot where Zach Wilson has the opportunity or the option to run or hand it off, and he's basically saying, I instructed LaFleur to make sure our best playmaker gets the ball. Who knows? None of us were there, but throwing the guy under the bus in a season that's already done feels kind of bizarre, especially when you handpicked him as your guy, and maybe that's the relationship they have. They can be open and honest. They spent time together in San Francisco, but it just feels like an odd time to publicly throw your OC under the bus. I didn't hear much from Saleh when his own defense gave up a 93-yard touchdown drive to an offense without Godwin, AB, Fournette, and Mike Evans playing at 70%. But apparently that's irrelevant to Robert Saleh.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different things that went on there. You talk about the level of trust and confidence those two have in one another. To your point, maybe it's just the dynamic of the relationship that they feel much more comfortable being open and honest, getting it out there. So the burden of proof didn't fall on Zach Wilson. But nearly it would have been the second largest win, if not the biggest, for the Jets this season in the wake of upsetting the Bengals and putting together back-to-back wins against the Jags. But a lot to be optimistic about, at least you would think. The Jets' 2 top draft picks coming in the upcoming entry drafts. We'll see how they go about doing that, and we'll ultimately figure out if they do have their franchise quarterback and, more importantly, their head coach to take them forward. One game that we broke down on the Thursday podcast, Payne, Titans and Dolphins. We talked about the Dolphins being a team that hadn't had a step up in class. They stepped up and they got smacked in the mouth by Tennessee, who now controls their own destiny in the AFC playoff picture.
Little battle on that game. I know when we recorded the podcast Thursday, we said a sharp group laid 3. That was obviously the case. That's why it was out to 3.5. And then some of the number guys removed the hook. Basically like Saturday, one spot even went to like 2.5. And then probably 20 minutes before kick, Titans got hit and they closed like 3.2. Titans defense continues to look pretty damn good. And Tua was abysmal, right? Completion percentage, more than 17% below expectation in terms of EPA plus completion percentage above expectation. Only Mike Glennon was worse. And I didn't watch that game, but you did. And that's probably tough to envision Tua being that bad in such a critical game. He turned it over twice, picked once. Tennessee recovered one of his 3 fumbles. And I think it's probably time to spark the Deshaun Watson conversation again, because as accurate as Tua is, I don't think you can rely on him health-wise, and there are some clear limitations that he has. So if you kind of want to get over the hump, you're probably going to have to spend some bucks. And I think now that you went on a 7-game win streak and the 49ers went on their win streak, your draft picks aren't as valuable as they were when you were kicking this around the first time. So let's see what transpires in the offseason. I'm sure there's going to be a little bit more competition now for Deshaun Watson if things continue to check out. I also mentioned the Dolphins being a little soft at times with their run defense. And if you look at Foreman, Hilliard, and McNichols, 191 yards combined on 36 carries. I mean, it was just box-to-wire domination from Tennessee, and now they control their own destiny, right? Beat the Texans in Week 18. You're number 1 seed. You get the bye. Derrick Henry is going to be back. A.J. Brown, Julio Jones would get 2 weeks to kind of rest their bodies and make this final push. I have no idea who the Titans are. Right? Like, we think they're a little overrated, but if you can get the Titans offense from the early part in the season when it was healthy, and you can get the Titans defense from basically the Rams game onward, and they play at those levels simultaneously, Titans are going to make a serious run. And I think what's interesting here, Todd, is I sent you a little note last week to check the futures. It's very rare that you can get potentially the number 1 seed in the AFC at 20-1. And that's what was being offered last week.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, the Titans have been so close in the past couple of years. They've come up short against the Ravens. They upset the Ravens. We'll see if they're finally able to use all of those learning experiences to get over the hump, should they have their full complement of offensive weapons. And to your point, talking about the defense, that's been one of the more pleasant surprises. It's a group that they claim was retooled coming into the year. We didn't see it early on in the season, but to Mike Vrabel and the rest of that staff's credit, they've been able to right the ship, get them playing at a dynamic level, and now very much in control of their own destiny. So much so that the AFC playoff picture would run through Arrowhead. A team that had been playing exceptionally well stubbed its toe and opened the door for the bottom of the AFC playoff picture. I'm not sure how to describe what we saw unfold with the Indianapolis Colts, Payne. I mean, it felt like a relatively lifeless and uninspired performance after 2 draining efforts on Saturday nights against the New England Patriots and the Arizona Cardinals. Just 262 yards of offense and less than 5 yards per play. Carson Wentz throws for 148 yards, and 45 of those 48 yards were on a jump ball Hail Mary on the opening drive of the second half. What do we make of the Colts? Reason to panic, or, hey, look, this is just a blip on the radar? They now go into playoff mode as more than a 2-touchdown favorite on the road at Jacksonville to secure passage to the postseason.
I think you said the word lifeless.
Yep.
Is that what you said? And I think that's probably the right phrase to describe the Colts yesterday. But I think there's a reason for it, right? I mean, Carson Wentz had COVID. We've talked a lot this year about what player performance looks like after an illness. And on average over the last decade, whether it obviously wasn't COVID then, it was, the flu or whatever other variant of not feeling well was, there's about an 18% drop-off in production. And then you had your left tackle, Eric Fisher, who was out. Ryan Kelly returned after 2.5 weeks away from football. Both Quentin Nelson and Glowinski returned from illness as well up front. And so you combine those factors with the Raiders' run defense that's been second in rushing success rate allowed since week 12. And Carson Wentz really had 1 day of practice. It was like a Saturday walkthrough. This wasn't shocking, right? Like, a lot of sharp guys were asking me about the Colts in a teaser last week. And I kept shying away to the point where one of our teaser legs, rather than include the Colts, we went with the Saints, and they were minus 6.5 at the time. We did envision them going to 7, which is where they ultimately closed. But it's like we chose like a non-Wong teaser over the Colts because of what we kind of saw unfold there. And I don't know. What was interesting to me, though, was we had a little battle on this total. And we leaned under initially and early on in the week, and that was surprising for us based upon our numbers because we've been kind of the people controlling the over market when it comes to the Colts this year. And there was a group that came in somewhere between like 12 and 12:20 Eastern on game day and sent at least circa from 45.5 to 47 basically in one move, and 47's a key, and that triggered a buy for us. And to me, that was pretty much a dead nut under. It was 10-3 2 minutes before the half. You had 2 fourth down touchdowns in the game. Carson Wentz, to your point, threw up a prayer. It gets batted around twice, then just, I don't know, T.Y.
He was just chilling back there. He was waiting for the silver and black to collide.
Just
ball bounced up in the air, a fortuitous bounce right into his hands, and T.Y. was dancing in the back of the end zone.
Yeah, so, I mean, that was the gist of the scoring in that game. I mean, it played like a true playoff game. Now, what does it mean for the Colts? I think this is an imperfect team. Early on in the year, we saw a team that was substantially better than where they started and saw a lot of value in them. I think their peak can be really good, but we've talked about some of their holes. And again, I still think Carson Wentz, now he hasn't shown it the last 2 or 3 weeks, but leading up to the Arizona game or even the Patriots game, he was playing well better than perception. But there's still, like, is he a franchise quarterback? Probably not, right? Are there a ton of great weapons past Pittman on this offense? Not really. And Pittman's probably not a traditional number one at this point. Might be like a 1B or a 1C or like, you know, a 2A type receiver. And then where are you deficient on defense? Well, it's in the secondary. And so as much as I love Chris Ballard and Frank Reich, if you look at the construction of this team, and I think I've said this once or twice before, it's 2021, and you're a run-first team without a franchise quarterback, some questions to your weapons outside, and your corner situation is quite bleak, and it's a pass-first league. So that's really what we're seeing from this team and why they're probably not as consistent as we think they could or should be.
Yeah, I mean, it's a team that I think is going to be a difficult out in the playoffs. Look, I don't expect their losing streak in Jacksonville to continue as 15.5, 16-point favorites on Sunday. And all you need to do is get a seat at the table, and you can be a thorn in everyone's side because the run game can travel. And we've seen the Colts at their best in a couple of hostile environments this season, despite putting forth a lethargic effort against the Las Vegas Raiders. But speaking of lethargic pain, for anyone that watched the Rams and Ravens, no one could be impressed with the Rams' offensive display. I know it was their third game in 13 days, so a little bit of a flat spot traveling in back-to-back weeks. But Matthew Stafford continued to struggle. 6 picks now over his last 3 games and only 5 touchdown passes. The Rams, though, got the drive when they needed it most, kept themselves in the thick of things, and do control their own destiny to be AFC West champions. NFC West champions, excuse me.
Yeah, no worries. I think what's interesting is in that spot, or as you mentioned, 3 games in 13 days, they did go back home, so. Correct?
Yep.
And then they went back out there. I mean, you get a win in the NFL on the road under those circumstances, and you're happy. But I think in terms of us trying to, you know, project ahead, and Matthew Stafford has been pretty bleak. And I'm looking at his numbers. Since that Week 9 game against Tennessee, quarterbacks with at least 50 snaps, Matthew Stafford's 24th in EPA plus completion percentage above expectation. He's become a turnover machine. And you mentioned the interceptions. There's some fumbles along the way as well. He's not holding on to the ball when he gets hit in the pocket either. And for whatever reason, the turnovers seem to be like wildly impactful ones in terms of field position. Right? They're not just like your garden variety, we're going to like turn it over at midfield type thing. They're like, we're going to turn it over in our own end. They're going to be pick sixes. I mean, they are very impactful turnovers. McVay also feels to be a little too run heavy at times. There's always a situation or two where you're like left scratching your head by a McVay decision or play call virtually every week. And I think that's ultimately what's going to prevent him from being in the elite category of coaches. He's got to get some of that figured out. I mean, there's just some head-scratching stuff almost every week from him. Very good coach in general, but I think that's kind of what's keeping him from propelling into the elite category. But there's certainly some question marks that the Rams have to have answered. There was the fight internally, right? Just randomly. Jalen Ramsey getting into it with a teammate, which is somewhat surprising based upon how well the defense has been playing over the last 4, 5, 6 weeks. Right? It's a unit that's really been downright phenomenal. If you're not paying close attention, the Rams defense has been trending better than its offense by a long mile. And so to see that with the defense playing so well was a little bit wild to me. Now, I know I saw a lot of guys make a bigger deal out of it than I think it was, right? Jalen Ramsey threw a punch. No, it was kind of an open-handed shove to the face mask. It wasn't anything too egregious, but it certainly leaves some questions as to why that happened.
It wasn't quite a Daron Payne and Jonathan Allen situation like we saw on Sunday Night Football with the Washington football team. We know Ramsey is one of the more fiery competitors out there, and hey, sometimes you got to knock your teammates around and make sure they're doing what they're supposed to. Of course, for the Rams, the big situation that we'll keep tabs on going into the regular season finale and obviously into the postseason will be the potential return of Cam Akers and the kind of workload he can take on. We know how dynamic a difference maker he was for stretches last year for the Rams when he was actually healthy, allowing them to create balance. As far as other quarterback performances, Payne, I mean, the Mike Glennon experience, honestly, I looked at the stats in the first half. I looked at the stats after the game were over. I didn't watch a single play in that football game. But when you're chasing a 20-point deficit and you can only complete 4 passes all game long, Mike Glennon, happy trails, my friend. If you're on an NFL roster next year, you're pulling the best Houdini act known to mankind.
He was terrible. He was not good. And this is coming off of the Fromm performance last week against the Eagles, which was equally horrific. And that was one of those situations where, what was the score at halftime? Was it 22 to 3, I believe? So 25 points. Yep. And Books hung a 16.5 for the second half total. And that wasn't even close. Dead sniff. Glennon was as bad as it gets, right? I mean, if you look at like the EPA plus completion percentage above expectation chart for the week, you have kind of a clump of quarterbacks, right? Obviously, the Joe Burrows of the world stood out, and Aaron Rodgers was phenomenal. He stood out. But, you know, I would say like 28 quarterbacks were kind of in a clump. Then you have this massive gap to Tua. And as bad as Tua played, there's an even larger gap to Mike Glennon. He's almost off the sheet, okay? And that's how bad Mike Glennon was. And this wasn't some great defense that he faced. We've kind of talked over the last, 6 weeks. Sean Desai's scheme had kind of been caught on to. There was a ton of injuries on the Bears defense. This really wasn't a unit that was great by any stretch. So to not go out there and score points, some points, was pretty staggering, and it was kind of what we had discussed leading up, right? I watched the Giants-Dolphins game. That was about 4 weeks ago. There was a lot of quit in the Giants. And then you kind of watch them, and I know they had a chance to backdoor the cover against the Dallas Cowboys, and that's a division game, so there was some effort there. But overall, the last month, this wasn't a team that put on a lot of effort, I didn't think, especially on the offensive side of the ball. They're just kind of going through the motions. So very interesting game there. There's a little bit of a battle, right? Because initially in the week we thought hey, we heard the common phrase who are the Bears to be laying this to anybody? And I just kind of looking at my numbers, the Bears are bad, but this actually feels about right. And then I think late Friday, Saturday-ish was it, where suddenly a slew of receivers were all announced out for the Giants, and it went back to 6.5, and I think there's even a couple of spots that hit 7, and the Bears were the clear right side.
Yeah,
from
I mean, they
away.
went out there. They took advantage of a couple of turnovers, 2 touchdown drives totaling, I think, 26 yards. It was 14-0 before you blinked, and it was good night, sweetheart, in the Mike Glennon revenge game. I don't want to be too critical of this next quarterback, but I do think it's worth mentioning. Erratic has been synonymous with Josh Allen's performances. I know they weren't exactly optimal weather conditions out there, and he ran the ball effectively as he's done all season, 15 carries for 81 yards and 2 touchdowns, but 11 of 26 for 120 yards and 3 interceptions. Should we worry about Josh Allen potentially providing a ceiling for what this Bills team can accomplish when we get into the playoffs?
He's obviously not had the best season, or I should say the season that mirrors what he did a year ago. I didn't watch a single snap of this game. There's one I was going to go back and watch. I know there was some movement on the spread pregame where there's some talks of Buffalo, minus 13.5 when it got down to soft 14, and there was a group that took the 14.5. So, I mean, the game kind of played around the number late. In terms of Josh Allen, I mean, completion percentage was 17% below expectation yesterday. You mentioned the 3 picks. It was not a good day for him. Obviously, 15 rushes for 81 yards added a ton of value from that perspective, and that's part of the game that we anticipated he wouldn't have to do this week because we thought it would be an easy win, right? We've talked about Josh using his legs in high leverage games and situations like he did a week ago in New England, and your hope was that he wasn't going to have to do that in this game. That wasn't the case, right? They were in a battle for their lives at halftime trailing. I don't know what's going to go on with Josh Allen. It's kind of one of those situations where you play a peak game. That was really their Super Bowl
100%.
Week. And that was the game that they were just, and so that was kind of my fear with laying Buffalo this week, even though our numbers were like a touch higher. I think we made like 16.8, right? Like you're going to get out and lay 14 and at that point, like, maybe 13.5 makes some sense with the value through the 14, but just never ended up doing anything with that game. But I think there are some concerns, right? Obviously, he had some weapons that were still down. There was snow. There was some wind. Again, we've talked about this, right? The way Buffalo is built doesn't necessarily mesh with where they play games late in the season, and that's why Brian Daboll has wanted to work on his team's ability to play left-handed. And I think it's kind of taken them out of form and rhythm throughout much of this season, but you could clearly see the thought process, and the thought process made a ton of sense. I still think they're quite scary overall, and we still haven't seen a team that, Tampa Bay kind of went up and down on them early without Tre'Davious White. I still think ultimately that could be, their undoing at some point, not having Tre'Davious White. Again, look across the board, and this is really something funny that we haven't really discussed, but it's like all of these teams have warts. And it seems like every single week we're calling out one team for the wart, and we don't really, mention other teams, or we try to make a bigger deal of like a 60-minute sample or a one-game data point. I mean, just kind of look like, what's Tampa Bay right now? I mean, that was as lethargic of an effort as there was last week. And now you have no Chris Godwin. You have no Antonio Brown. Mike Evans is still trying to battle his way back from a hamstring injury. We don't know what's going on with Fournette. Secondary has still not come around. JPP is constantly in and out of the lineup at end, battling with an injury that probably is going to require some surgery towards the end of the season. What are the Rams, right? We just sat here and talked about Matthew Stafford. What's going to happen with the Chiefs situation at their tackle positions? Is Clyde Edwards-Helaire going to return in time? There are question marks about all of the elite teams, and that's why, last week I hinted when we're going to start breaking down some of these playoff games, which I can't wait to get to, right? Like let's get past week 18 here and all of the COVID mess and teams not playing for much and all of that stuff. I'm looking really forward to the playoffs because it is going to be matchup predicated. It's going to be far less about the number and far more about the matchup, I think, with this playoffs.
Yeah, if you're the Tampa Bay Bucks, to your point, I'd be stunned if they're playing their guys in a meaningless Week 18 game against Carolina. Let everybody, especially the veterans, heal up, rest, recover, and be ready to put it all together for a playoff run. The one thing I will say, for as big a detractor as I've been of Green Bay in recent years, I'd be a fool to ignore what this team has accomplished so far this season. And if they're going to get key pieces back in the likes of David Bakhtiar, even at 60, 65% along that O-line, you get Jair Alexander to return, who I don't know if a lot of people saw, found himself onto the COVID list for this week's game, which means, guess what? He's not going to have to test for the next 90 days and should be available as a contributing factor of that Green Bay secondary. It makes Green Bay a very difficult out, despite some of their difficulties stopping the run, should they face a physically imposing ground game. But it will make for a compelling playoff picture on both the AFC and NFC side. Wasn't sure if there was anything else that you wanted to highlight, Payne, that stood out to you from your viewership over the weekend.
No, I think that's everything, and we can kind of get into Monday Night Football. It's not the most glamorous game, but we can head there. Don't have a ton of stuff on the game. I think the discussion's probably more about the fluctuating price than anything else, but Yeah, if we want to.
Yeah, no look-ahead numbers here, as obviously a lot of these prices off the board. Situations have changed, so that's their normal exercise here on Monday that we're going to forego this week. Want to remind all of you, our loyal listeners, follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at BetTheBoardPod. FanDuel.com. Use the promo code BetTheBoard. Make sure you add another out to your arsenal just in time for the NFL postseason. Take advantage of some of those aggressive new user sign-up bonuses. And you mentioned the number here, Payne. So we can start at the top line. We're at FanDuel Sportsbook right now. You're looking at the Pittsburgh Steelers, a 2.5-point favorite. Total on this game sits at 43. Obviously, this number started to move on Sunday afternoon. We saw the Browns get out to as much as a 3.5-point favorite, but as game results started to come in, you realize that the playoff outlook for the Cleveland Browns was getting bleaker and bleaker until it was officially removed from the equation. And last night, you saw this number come crashing down to a pick'em. And then early this morning, when we were about ready to start recording, you saw some of the more prominent shops in the world head out to 3, and we have not seen an appetite for Cleveland Browns money at a full field goal just yet. I think it's fascinating to discuss it because I do believe it's more about market dynamics in this game than it is anything X's and O's we could see on the football field.
It's really just so much perception, right? I mean, we saw Cleveland open 3, and a lot of the numbers guys sent it out to 3.5. And at that point, you and I talked, there was one group that was just kind of biding their time and wanted Pittsburgh. And I went and looked at our numbers, and, Pittsburgh at plus 3.5, I hate Pittsburgh. Hated Pittsburgh since the beginning of the season. We were going to make Pittsburgh -1 in this game. And so I feel pretty dumb not having grabbed a 3.5. I was kind of waiting on that. And then just didn't bite the bullet because as it was kind of like trending back towards 3, soft 3.5, I was hearing that this group was going to come in and lay the Browns. And matchup-wise, I thought the Browns were going to have success running the football here, right? They got their ground game on track against Green Bay last week. I mean, uber efficient, almost 9 yards a carry last week, and you have a Pittsburgh defense that just has not shown an ability in recent times to stop the run. I mean, they were the least efficient defense this year, stopping first down runs. So that was going to be perfect for the Kevin Stefanski offense. It's going to allow Baker to throw from comfortable situations tonight. They were getting some cornerbacks healthy with Newsome. Obviously, the safety position still decimated by injury, it looks like. But that was kind of the vibe of this game, is that the matchup was going to be fantastic. And then all of a sudden, things unfold the right way, and the Cleveland Browns are officially eliminated from the playoffs. The Steelers, obviously, long shot, right? They have to win the next 2 and then hope, as you mentioned, the Colts continue to stub their toe in Jacksonville and lose to the Jaguars. But the perception of this and the teams have changed a little bit. And I don't know what's going to unfold here from the time we finish recording to game time, right? Does it make sense now that you're eliminated to play Myles Garrett, even with his brash comments about ending Big Ben's career basically tonight? Is he going to play? Does it make sense to play a guy that you've spent $100 million on in a meaningless game who's playing at 75%? I don't know. So are there going to be more dominoes that fall in terms of who's out? JOK, we know, is on the big C list. Is he going to get cleared in time? He's one of the most vital defenders the Browns have. He is just that versatile. Let's see if he plays. So I could see a situation where this gets to 3, and it's kind of there now. Let's see who else gets announced out. My gut says, Todd, that the numbers guys that I was speaking to that were anxious to lay 3 on the Browns once the limits increased are still going to want the Browns at the best plus price here. So there's a little bit of a battle there. What I can tell you, though, is the total. There's been one-way action. I know everybody thinks, division game, Browns, Steelers. The last one ended 15-10, and I think we gave out first half under for our listeners in that game. Over 40.5 was one of the sharper total plays this week. A group hit it. It's why it was out to 41.5, 41 a lot of places. And then yesterday, another group bought the half point and went over 40.5 again at the places that were still dealing 41. We're now out to 43. Now that the game is virtually meaningless, is it going to open up a little bit? Big Ben in his last game at home, it's going to be a chuck or duck situation. We'll see. If you're the Cleveland Browns organization, Does it make sense to go ground and pound here, right? Because that's what you would have done if the game was meaningful. But now do you say to yourself, fuck it, let's see if Baker Mayfield's our guy? That would be the directive I have for Kevin Stefanski, is I don't care if we win this game or not. If we end up losing and getting better draft position, awesome. That also provides potentially more leverage to go get a quarterback if not. But we need to find out what Baker Mayfield is. I know he's not 100%. I know we don't have all of our weapons out there. But for me, if I'm running the Browns organization, this game plan tonight is not about winning the game and handing it off to Chubb 38 times and wearing him out and potentially getting him injured. I want to see what Baker Mayfield is in this spot.
Yeah, I can't argue with.
So if it becomes a little more pass happy tonight, that lends itself to the over a little bit. Now, again, 43, extremely important key number, right? 41, key number. So we've blown through some of that stuff. Let's see if we can get to 44, which is the largest key number in the NFL right now. I don't know. But that's just kind of what we have on this game. It's tough talking about a game, on Monday when the market's been open 7 days and we've had, now what looks like, a 6.5 point move on the side and, about a 2.5, 3 point move on the total through two very
Well, what I
large
can
teams.
talk about, Payne, and this might be the part of the show where Browns fans want to cover their ears, avert their eyes, or do a variety of things. The Browns now officially will miss the playoffs for the 18th time in the last 19 seasons. A loss tonight against the Steelers would give them a losing record for the 17th time in the last 19 seasons. They, of course, won 11-5 last year. We know the Pythag didn't suggest that. And they went 10-6 while missing the playoffs back in 2007. Losing record every other year, but maybe more impressively than that, Payne, they'll finish their 14th straight season in a row with a negative scoring margin. That is an NFL worst all time. So you talk about a franchise that gets a little bit of hope and a little bit of optimism, they come crashing back to earth, and you can only begin to wonder what the preseason prognostications will look like for the Browns heading into 2022. If they can keep this roster healthy, they can sort out their quarterback situation, and they can maybe be the team next year that a lot of us anticipated they would be this year.
It's really interesting, right? And you're kind of like anticipating what may transpire in the offseason. But if everything checks out with Deshaun Watson, if you're the Texans, you have to be loving life right now because there are a couple teams that are a quarterback away, right? Like Dolphins in the mix for Deshaun Watson, right? If you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, who just refuse to rebuild, Deshaun Watson changes your franchise immediately. If you're the Browns, Deshaun Watson changes your franchise immediately. And there are a couple teams, right? Like, what happens if you find out, like, Trey Lance isn't the guy, right? Would San Francisco even be willing to package Trey Lance and a couple ones to go get Deshaun
That's an
Watson?
Interesting team. But
there's so many teams that can position themselves here where they're just kind of like a quarterback away. I know we're kind of like going left on the conversation, but like the other interesting thing here is we're talking about these games moving a ton. Maybe there's an in-game situation. That's kind of what I am looking for here, right? Pittsburgh Steelers have scored 50% of their points in the fourth quarter. Maybe they start slow and you have a situation where you can get the Steelers in-game. Maybe both teams start slow and there's a situation where you can get an in-game over number. So that's kind of how I'm kind of thinking about this right now. I didn't mean to cut you off. We can go left in terms of the maybe generalization of teams or organizations that may
no. When you mentioned
that's where you were going.
When you mentioned the 49ers, I think it's fascinating because I have to imagine there were a lot of folks in that stadium at halftime when it was 7-3 Houston Texans watching Trey Lance spray the ball over the yard and Davis Mills take command of an offense that has very few weapons, and the Houston Texans going, man, are we really going to lose to Davis Mills in our backyard and know that Trey Lance is the face of our future? But I think it's unfair for Trey Lance, and you were probably the first person to say it anywhere, that, hey, look, he was going to be raw. It was going to take some time, and Lance, of all the quarterbacks that were drafted in the first round, was the least equipped to make an instant impact given what was going to be asked of him.
Yeah, I mean, you just think about the difference in competition and play, and then you think about some of the tools that he has, right? I mean, in terms of talent, there's probably there was, I don't know how many quarterbacks are more talented, right? The guy is physical, right? You can use him in the run game. He's quick. He's got a cannon for an arm. What I saw in the first half almost felt like a quarterback that was in between mechanics, right? We knew his mechanics sucked to start, when they drafted him. And now, like, the last, like, month, all we've heard from players and the organization is this guy's been killing it at practice. But they're working on his mechanics. And it kind of felt like it was like we're in between the old mechanics and the new mechanics, right? There's times where he's just floating balls. There's times where, you watch his release point and there's no one around him and the ball just, comes out like a duck. But there's no doubt if he can get that part of his game figured out, that there's a world of things that a brilliant guy like Kyle Shanahan can do with him, because he does have that ability. And I think that's ultimately what 49er fans have been longing for. It's that if Jimmy G is going to continue to turn the ball over and they're even remotely close in terms of their passing ability, then we have to play Trey Lance because he just provides so much with his legs and physicality and athleticism. And so I think that's the interesting dynamic here. Now, let's see what comes of this. He's going to have the entire offseason to work on his game. I think that's probably the direction you're going to go and make him your week 1 starting quarterback next year. And if it's you start out 2-6, Kyle Shanahan's going to have to figure out how to end the season, I would say 500 to keep his job. He'll get another year after next, right? If it's another 500 type performance. If it just completely falls off the cliff and they somehow end up 5-12, then Kyle Shanahan's probably out of a job. But I don't, right? That's the question, right? Like, you're going to have to monitor that. Is that the risk you're going to want to take? And that's ultimately why the Deshaun Watson situation becomes a little bit interesting to me. Because if your life is on the line, I think Deshaun Watson's probably the guy that has the foundation, that has a more solid foundation to keep your job. But and certainly Trey Lance is going to get you more than I think Tua would, right? Just because of the raw talent. And I don't know. It's going to be an interesting offseason. I think it's going to be one of the more interesting offseasons.
What do you think it takes to get Deshaun Watson somewhere else? If you're Miami putting together a package, if you're Cleveland, if you're the Steelers, or you're a variety of other teams in the mix, maybe even a Denver Broncos team out there. I mean, is it two ones, yep, and is it proven NFL commodities? Or if you're the Houston Texans, have you lost leverage because this thing has gone on for more than a season?
See, I think you actually will end up gaining leverage. That's kind of what I hinted at before. If things get cleared up. Right, if his situation is cleared up, then all of a sudden you have potentially like 4 or 5 suitors. And those 4 or 5 suitors now don't get Deshaun Watson in the middle of the season. They get him before the season, where you can get him acclimated to your new scheme. And so there's value in that. Now, I think if it's a team like the Pittsburgh Steelers, who don't have a ton of cap, like what chips do they have? Maybe, Chase Claypool's attractive if you've kind of are over his antics, maybe. But like, you don't have a quarterback that's of value to place in the package. So I think in terms of draft picks, you're not giving up as many if Trey Lance is included. If it's draft picks, right, you're not giving up as many if you're Miami and Tua can go in there. I think a team like Pittsburgh obviously will have to give up more picks because they don't have the asset under center that the other couple teams do. I think even with Denver, right? I mean, like, I think we kind of know what Drew Lock.
Oh, they're not. I mean, I wouldn't want Drew Lock in that deal. I go, hey, you know what? Right. We'll trade you to Deshaun Watson, but do us a favor. You guys keep Drew Lock. He can remain your problem.
Right. So that always becomes the interesting element in terms of like what it takes to get them. I think, a Trey Lance or a Tua, you probably have to give up less picks because there is some value there at their age. Right? I mean, as bad as Tua was yesterday, I mean, the guy's an accurate passer. Now he throws with anticipation, right? Because that's what he has to do, and it leads to some costly turnovers. But, I mean, he's still an accurate quarterback, which is a value at this point, and we know he's got the pedigree at Alabama, and there is potential for him to be a above average quarterback.
Man, I just wonder behind the scenes what the discussions are like in the Houston Texans front office, if they actually want to go out and get another quarterback, or they truly believe that Davis Mills could answer a lot of their questions at the position. Obviously plays it a hell of a lot differently than what they've grown accustomed to in Deshaun Watson, but you would like to see the kid be surrounded with weapons and a capable offensive line. He hasn't had that luxury, at least in the early going.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think you're going to take, you're over the Deshaun Watson situation. So you're going to take whatever the best package is, right? Whether it's, however that asset package comes along, whether it's picks, whether it's a quarterback and picks, you're just going to take the best package.
Fascinating things to pay attention to. No doubt about it, obviously.
As we see, by the way, early on a Monday morning, Denver Broncos money coming in. I think we're going to come off.
Well, that game was 3 on a look-ahead number at FanDuel Sportsbook earlier, and I can't imagine we see Teddy Bridgewater, but you should get a return of a lot of the guys that missed this past week against the Chargers that were on the COVID reserve list, I would think.
Yep. And then obviously the potential of 2 starting tackles.
And the other
down.
thing to keep in mind as well, there was only a few short weeks ago, and we saw this game played on Sunday night. Professional bettors ran over men, women, and children to back the Broncos at +10. That game closed 8.5. And here we are, a change in venue, a change in weather, a change in health and status, and we're looking at Kansas City, a 9.5-point road favorite. So to your point, wouldn't shock me at all if there's an appetite in a standalone game. The one thing I will say, as we talk about all the time, amazing that the market entry comes on a Monday morning for a game that will be by itself Saturday afternoon, and the general public will do everything they can to have a ticket in one way, shape, or form that you couldn't think there might be a 10.5 out there. But different discussion. Sure.
Let me ask you this. What's with the Saturday
I
games?
think the NFL just wants to try and showcase some of these games. The problem being is neither one of these is extremely attractive. I mean, we know Kansas City.
I didn't know. I'm so out of it, right? I knew that like the Saturday game thing was a thing late in the year. I just didn't know it was going to be in Week 18. I thought everyone should have been put on equal footing in terms of like rest for the playoff teams. The other situation we have brewing here is the Titans are now going to know their fate. Like I thought we all started these games with playoff meaning at the same time. And now you've kind of given the Chiefs like another kick in the dick after you did them wrong yesterday.
I think the league, obviously, with the way they structured it, because they wanted those games that, to your point, should normally go on simultaneously, that figuring that Kansas City can put pressure on the Titans.
Yeah.
If the Titans, get the fortunate bounce of Kansas City losing outright, they'll sit all of their guys. There's no doubt about that. The Cowboys and Eagles game loses a lot of luster because I believe that the Eagles are already into the playoffs, if memory serves me correct.
Well, yeah, let's not go too far down the path if we're unsure. I mean, I think I don't think there's a situation where, again, I'm speaking out of turn. I don't know off the top of my head. If the Chiefs lose, I don't think the Titans win
because the Titans would then have the head-to-head tiebreaker against Kansas City because they beat them earlier this season.
Okay, and if the Bengals went out and won and got to 11 wins, then what?
No, I don't think the Bengals do have the tiebreaker there. I have to double check and look at those things. Okay. But the way that they've positioned all of it as such is that it would be basically the Chiefs or the Titans because of division records.
So it's just so bizarre that the games are not being played simultaneously.
It's the NFL trying to get their additional primetime windows on Saturday afternoon, Saturday night. Now, at least they were given a gift as far as the standalone game on Sunday Night Football, right out here in the desert between the Chargers and Raiders, where we know when and you're in, barring some ridiculous circumstances elsewhere. Yeah,
that's going to be a good game.
So probably one of maybe 3 games that we'll talk about later in the week, in addition to the college football national championship. But hey, this is the world we live in. We know that everyone wants more eyeballs on the product, and if it changes the competitive balance, that's never been something that the NFL has really worried too much about, unfortunately. So
yes, and somehow in a short podcast, we're going to make
there's more banter, back and forth, ball busting, all the kind of things that everyone has grown accustomed to around these parts, and you taking shots at my preferred movie choices. So,
well, this is how nice of a guy I am. I'm willing to give people second, third, fourth, fifth chances. I got a movie recommendation from a guy who's never seen Breaking Bad or The Godfather.
Godfather 2. I've seen Godfather. Just never in its
Godfather
entirety,
2.
though. I will
Godfather
admit that.
2.
I have never sat down and watched Godfather from start to finish. I've seen it in fits and spurts and kind of partial together.
Yeah. So,
all right, I'm going to keep those to myself going forward then. So if I go 10 for my next 10, you just won't get to know about them. So.
Okay. Well, let's hope for your sake.
We'll keep them to ourselves. All right, you got anything else you want to say to our listeners? Do we know if we're going to record on Thursday this week or we may push it back? Have we discussed those things?
I think we could probably shoot for a Thursday where we discuss some of the NFL games that are straightforward, right? Meaning they're actually being where both teams care, and then toss in the national championship game.
That'll work. Give us a chance to breathe a little bit, and I can get last laugh when George is out to a 7-point favorite in that game. I'm
the owner of the Stetson Bennett fan club. So that would make me very happy.
Membership,
the text message.
Membership cards flying off the shelf
during that game against Michigan. You were dying to get back in the club, and we're like,
membership cards flying off the shelf.
The best part
everybody
is
buying them with their Christmas return gifts. They're buying membership into the Stetson Bennett fan club, led by chairman, president, and founder, the one, the only Payne Insider.
Our text message chain is typically a safe space, so we don't really divulge what goes on there. But I will say this. After Stetson Bennett made the 2 deep throws where he gets absolutely hammered simultaneously making the throw, Todd's response was, great play call from Todd.
I was not giving credit to Stetson Bennett. I was not giving Stetson credit. I was giving it to the OC for opening up the playbook.
Yes, which is something we thought would actually happen. I know a lot of people thought it was going to be a ground and pound thing, but it did not shock me, especially with those numbers we divulged with how poor the Michigan Wolverines were defending play action. So it was just a good game across the board. It was chalky, kind of how we thought it would be, and thank God the loyal listeners got there with an under on Alabama-Cincinnati, since we basically just gave money away on
unfortunately, we try our best to get the information in real time, and this NFL season has been a little bit more challenging than others in that particular regard. And to your point, Georgia made the whole Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojabo not a thing whatsoever. Not sure I heard either of those players mentioned on the telecast in a positive fashion. As Michigan, a nice Cinderella story, ran into a brick wall that was a superior football team in the Georgia Bulldogs.
They couldn't even play Ojabo. If you look at his snap count, he played less than the backup end because he can't set the edge. And so once Georgia kind of built their lead and Hutchinson and Ojabo couldn't get after the quarterback, it basically became a run game. And Ojabo was just getting plowed because he can't set the edge. So he didn't even play as many snaps as like their third defensive end, which is really interesting. And potentially a game where his draft stock got hurt.
Back to the drawing board for some of these guys, and we'll see if Michigan is able to sustain their momentum. But one college football game left to go, a bevy of National Football League action still on the horizon as we'll wrap up the regular season in style. Week 18. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. For all of our loyal listeners, thanks for tuning in with us all regular season long. Like we said, one more regular season podcast to go. And should you choose to get involved in the Browns and Steelers on Monday Night Football, nothing but the best of luck. And hopefully we'll see you at the window.